Okay, so we are in the Sensual Arena, and the first sense we are going to talk about is sight. And again, I apologize for the immensity of the text. Here, this is primarily meant to be used as a handout, so that you will be able to refer to a specific definition and then also teach from it. But I have taken from this AOA.org website for the American Optometric, I think is how you say it, Association. Vision begins when light rays are reflected off an object and enter the eyes through the cornea and transparent outer covering of the eyes. So basically, let's just talk initially that light rays are coming in, and as we have taken a look previously, the light rays that come in to your eye are operating at very high frequencies. The colors in the color spectrum of electromagnetic radiation are in the terahertz range, which means hundreds of thousands of times per second data is being processed on that band. And I just want you to recognize that your sight is a very high sensitive, high data input, a sense that's bringing in a lot of data at a very high rate into your mind. So anytime that your eyes are open, your mind is definitely moving at a faster rate and oscillating closer to the alpha states, maybe even the beta states that are conducive to the awakened state or conscious state, if you will. So then the cornea bends or refracts the rays that pass through a round hole called the pupil, so that's the round part of your eye. The iris, or colored portion of the eye, surrounds the pupil. It opens and closes, making that pupil bigger or smaller to regulate the amount of light passing through. And we, of course, you can test this by putting a flashlight in your eye and seeing the muscle contract and retract. And it's interesting that you don't feel that. It just does it, and it does it on its own. The light rays then pass through the lens, which actually changes shape so it can further bend the rays and focus them on the retina at the back of the eye. So the back of the eye, or the retina, is really the beginning stage of where this electromagnetic radiation, or this light, is beginning to focus and beginning to get transmuted into an image and into a signal that your brain can process. The retina is a thin layer of tissue at the back of the eye that contains millions of tiny little light-sensing nerves light-sensing nerve cells called rods and cones, which are named for their distinct shape. Cones are concentrated in the center of the retina in an area called the macula, and in bright light conditions, cones provide clear, sharp central vision and detect colors and fine details. Rods are located outside the macula and extend all the way to the outer edge of the retina. That word macula, probably, if you've ever heard of macular degeneration, is probably where you've heard that word more than anything, and that's just a breaking down of that particular area of the eye. They provide peripheral or side vision. Rods also allow the eyes to detect motion and help us see in dim light and at night. These cells in the retina convert the light into electrical impulses. So again, the light that comes in, it's electromagnetic radiation. It's light, it's radiation, it is electricity, and a very keen element when we get into talking about the rods of knowledge and how a gestalt is primarily an electrical impulse that takes place in your mind and does some specific things. But then we part of the reason of pointing out these different senses and showing you how they actually operate is to reinforce the fact that we are talking about electrical impulses, and computers aren't built the way they are for no reason at all. We didn't just stumble upon that. We basically model computers in many aspects off of the way the human body actually works, and we'll definitely see more of that. But we see here that these cells are converting light into electrical impulses. And the optic nerves then sends these impulses to the brain where the image is produced. And all you want to do, I want here to show you a video of the human eye so that you can get a very good idea, 2 quick 2-minute videos of how these particular senses work.
As you can see in this diagram, the human eye is very complicated. Light enters the eye through the pupil, which is the dark hole in the center of the iris. The iris is muscle tissue, which determines the size of the pupil. In bright light, the iris closes the pupil, so not as much light gets in. Under dark conditions, the iris opens up the pupil, allowing greater amounts of available light to enter the eye. The iris is the blue, green, brown, or hazel part of the eye. The white part of the eyeball is a tough protective skin. It covers the entire eyeball except for the clear area over the iris and pupil. This protective clear section is called the cornea. The cornea bends the light towards the lens. The cornea focuses the light entering the eye. Most people think that the lens is responsible for focusing, but that is wrong. The lens helps us to be able to focus on things that are close as well as things that are far away. The lens is adjusted when small muscles change the shape of the lens. However, it is the cornea that does the most to focus light that enters the eye. Light enters the cornea and then is bent towards the retina, where an inverted image strikes the rods and cones. The rods and cones send electrical impulses to the brain through nerve fibers that collect to form the optic nerve behind the eye. The place where the fibers come together has no rods or cones, so images can't be seen at this point. This spot is referred to as the blind spot. The optic nerve carries the information to the brain, where it is turned right side up and analyzed. Humans have two eyes for a purpose. We have what is called binocular vision. The image from each eye is combined to give us the ability to determine distance. The field of vision is determined by how much you can see without moving your head.
The location of the eyes enables us to see length, width, depth, and distance of an object. The eye has three layers: the sclera, choroid, and retina. The sclera is the outer white layer that maintains the shape of the eye. Muscles attached to the sclera control eye movements. Choroid is the middle layer that contains the blood vessels. The cornea is a clear circular area in the sclera where light enters the eye. The pupil is the circular opening in the front of the choroid. The iris is the colored smooth muscle surrounding the pupil, which adjusts the size of the opening according to the brightness of light. The lens is located behind the pupil and between the anterior and posterior chambers. The lens is a transparent, flexible biconvex structure that bends or refracts light rays, so they focus on the nerve cells of the retina. The chambers are filled with a watery fluid that gives shape to the eye and helps refract the light rays. The anterior fluid is called the aqueous humor, and the posterior fluid is called the vitreous humor. The retina is the inner layer and contains the nerve cells, the rods and cones, and the bipolar cells. Rods are sensitive to light but do not sense color. Cones sense color. The highest concentration of cones is in the fovea centralis. The rods and cones synapse with bipolar cells, which then synapse with the ganglia cells, whose axons form the optic nerve. Light rays enter the eye through the cornea, pupil, and lens, where the light rays are bent or refracted to focus them on the rods and cones, which transmit the stimulus to the optic nerve and then to the occipital lobe of the brain for interpretation.
And so there you have sight and the basic functionality of how your eyes work. And if you know anything about cameras and video cameras, it's interesting to see that, of course, we've taken our lessons from the human body and applied them to technology, and have very successfully been able to reproduce similar experiences with devices, which ultimately have also been used to robotically replace some of our senses. And That's just another study altogether. But that's the sense of sight, letting light into your eyes, and then changing that light impulse into an electrical impulse and processing it through the brain. All right, let's move on to hearing. According to the Academy of Otolaryngology, I think I said that right, found here at entnet.org, and I do encourage you to click on the links or head over to any of these sites and do any additional research from there, that if you want to know more about any of these senses. The ear has three main parts: the outer ear, which includes the external auditory canal, the middle ear, and the inner ear. And the outer ear, the part that you can see, opens into the ear canal. And then the eardrum, or tympanic membrane, separates the ear canal from the middle ear. And that middle ear contains three small bones that help amplify and transfer sound to the inner ear. And you'll see this in the videos to come. These three bones, or ossicles, they're called the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, also referred to as a hammer, anvil, and stirrup, respectively, and you'll see why. The inner ear contains the cochlea, which changes sound into neurological signals, and the auditory or hearing nerve, which takes the sound to the brain. So, see, everything has a function and a purpose, and what's interesting is when we begin, the more you understand how your hearing works, first of all, it can help you protect it as well as your sight and other things, but it can also help you isolate it. And when it comes time to do meditation and we approach the sensual arena in our meditation, by understanding how the ears actually work, you're going to find this interesting connection between your hearing and your subconscious as you go through meditation, and you can't help but wonder what aspect of these components of the hearing system are still working, yet just not being registered. And by understanding some of that technology, or some of that working of the hearing, it really goes a long ways in being able to isolate different senses and reduce the noise. And I use that not as actual noise, but the clatter and the clamor of everyday life, reduce it at a conscious and subconscious level, which helps your thinking and helps your peace and harmony and many other aspects of fundamental of getting these seven arenas to work together. But nonetheless, any source of sound sends vibrations or sound waves into the air. So if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a noise? Well, yes, it actually produces sound waves. How's that? I guess it doesn't actually become a noise until it's transmitted through somebody's ear. So maybe that's the answer to that question. It just simply emits sound waves. But like my guitar teacher used to say, those sound waves travel throughout the universe and continue to go and go and go. No doubt the actual impact that the sound wave has, though, in our atmosphere diminishes across a specific distance. So that argument continues to go. These funnel through the ear opening down the external ear canal and strike your eardrum, causing it to vibrate, very much how a microphone works, and in reverse, how a speaker works. The vibrations are passed to three small bones in the middle ear, which are very small and brittle, which transmit them to the cochlea. The cochlea contains tubes filled with fluid, and inside one of the tubes, tiny hair cells pick up the vibration and convert them into nerve impulses. These impulses are delivered to the brain via the hearing nerve. The brain interprets the pulses as sound, such as a music, such as voice, a car horn, or whatever the case may be. So that's a textual description of the hearing. Let's check out a few videos and find out exactly how the human ear works.
Inside your ear, sounds set off a complex chain of events. They enter as pressure waves, which push and pull your eardrum, making it vibrate. On the other side of the eardrum, these vibrations set a series of bones jiggling. They end with the smallest bone in your entire body, called the stirrup. It is smaller than a grain of rice. These bones allow you to hear. If a sound is too loud, a muscle pulls the stirrup away from the most sensitive parts. Temporarily at least, you go a bit deaf, but the rest of your ear is protected. Beyond the stirrup is a fluid-filled cavern, your cochlea. The incoming sound waves tickle clumps of tiny, hair-like sensors on the floor. These begin to dance to the sounds of the world outside. You have 30,000 sensors. Each picks out a different part of the sound and sends it straight to your brain.
Many of us take for granted a very extraordinary organ, our ears. To understand the ear, we need to understand what sound is. The speakers you are listening to right now are vibrating, flexing in and out, causing a wave of pressure through the air. The frequency of these waves, or the speed at which the sound-creating surface moves back and forth, affects the pitch of the sound. The level of air pressure in each wave is directly related to how loud the sound is. The outer part of our ear catches these waves. It faces forward and has a specially designed structure of curves helping us to determine direction of sound and emphasize frequencies needed for human speech. Now that the sound waves are caught, they travel through the ear canal and strike against our eardrum, a thin membrane about 10 millimeters wide. Now that we receive the sound, the middle ear transfers this energy. The smallest bones in your body, the malleus, incus, and stapes, start in motion. The malleus is attached to the eardrum, and as the sound passes along, the force is amplified by leverage until it arrives at the stapes, which acts like a piston, creating waves through the fluid of the inner ear. The most significant increase in force comes from a system of hydraulic amplification. The face of the stapes has a surface area of 3.2 square millimeters, while the eardrum has a surface of 55 square millimeters. Using this, along with a leverage through the malleus and incus, the final pressure is 22 times greater than when the sound first arrived. Now, we arrived at the most complicated part of the hearing, the cochlea. In reality, it is coiled up, but it is easy to understand straightened out. The stapes is causing pressure waves to travel through this structure. Along the inside wall is about 20 to 30,000 reed-like fibers. As the waves move along, it encounters fibers with the correct resonant frequency and energy is released. These fibers are not actually what give the signal to us that we heard something. There is a special structure containing hair cells next to these fibers. When the fibers resonate, they cause the hair cells to move, which then sends an electrical impulse to the cochlear nerve and on to the brain. Certain pitches of sound will resonate in specific locations, and louder sounds will cause more hair cells to move. Our brain interprets all this raw data, making it possible to enjoy a beautiful song or a conversation with a loved one. Just to think that all this is happening in your head right now at full speed. And not just one, but two of these sophisticated instruments are helping you to have the amazing sense of hearing. This is just one of the many systems found in the human body that go far beyond our humble human understanding.
And to think that the sense of hearing is also working in symphony with the other four senses, and the sense of sight, which we just saw, is a pretty significant testimony to the awesomeness of the human functionality. So then we move into the smell, and I find the smell to be the most interesting sense, in that it has to me, the most strenuous job, because smell, I in my own head, I can get my mind around sight because it is specific. It's radiation, it's light, it has properties that I'm familiar with and understand. The sense of smell isn't even, or the sense of hearing isn't even less constrictive and hard to understand concept, because it's pressure waves, and that just makes a lot of sense. But when it comes to smell, what makes a smell? You can't see it. How does it come about? And we know that the sense of smell is one of your greatest ways of accessing memories, because the sense of smell is so unique, and you cannot I don't believe you can duplicate its signature completely. So when you get anywhere near, I know that one of the strongest senses of smell that I relate to, and it's rare that I that I get around it, but when I do, it totally puts me right back where I want to be, or where I knew this smell. And I knew this smell at my aunt's house in Kentucky, and since I'm out here on the West Coast, I don't find this scent very often. And it's the smell of one of the bathrooms, which sat right next to the furnace room where there was a deep freeze, and for a while my bedroom. That little area there, and the smell being most concentrated at the restroom, and it wasn't the smell of a typical bathroom, that those bathroom smells that I am relating to. It's a very specific scent that always makes me think of the color blue, and I believe that was because the seat cover and the mats on the floor were blue. But when I smell that smell, I am thrust back into my childhood and dramatically influenced. It's as if I'm standing and can very, very clearly visualize what that surrounding area looked like, sounded like, everything else. And it's one of the strongest senses of smell that I relate to. And to understand the sense of smell, how it works, and just to have a functioning awareness of it is very important, because as we move forward, when we start learning how to take the different senses and utilize them in the Eigestalt strategy, in the process of discovering something, you're going to realize that by taking purposely fabricating a specific scent, whether it's a part of your history and it physically puts you or mentally puts you back at a certain place, or if simply by creating a certain scent can actually build a rod of knowledge that can be effective in constructing an idea, you'll discover this ability to build rods of knowledge based on scent that are going to lead you into big ideas that otherwise you never would have been able to do. And that may require you to change your relationship to your physical arena in order to allow that smell to come through. And all of these faculties start working together to stir your ability to access that idea in the sixth sense. So again, just more justification for why we are meticulously going through each of these senses, but at the same time trying to do it as quickly as possible. And with that note, let's move on. So every time we inhale, currents of air swirl up through the nostrils over the bony turbinates to a sheet about the size of a small postage stamp that contains millions of olfactory receptor neurons. This is the olfactory epithelium. Each of the millions of olfactory neurons has minuscule filaments or cilia extending from its knob, and the knob is located at the tip of the olfactory neuron, and the cilia project from the knob directly into the atmosphere. And again, don't be lost by that terminology. We'll see it more aptly here in a video very shortly. This is the only part of the brain that projects into the atmosphere, and that an interesting concept, as we have already discussed the physical arena. This is the only, and he didn't say this is the only part of the nose, this is the only part of the brain that projects into the atmosphere. There is a very direct relationship between the brain and the atmosphere here, and it's shown right there, showing you that the sense of smell can be incredibly powerful in thought and idea generation. The cilia contains olfactory receptors, specialized proteins that bind low molecular weight molecules or odorants. One of the big breakthroughs of the past 15 years was the discovery by L. Buck and R. Axel of a large multi-gene family that encode for these olfactory receptors. Each receptor has a pocket or a binding site that is just the right shape to bind either a specific molecule or a group of structurally similar molecules. The interaction of the right molecule with the right receptor causes the receptor to change its shape. Structural conformation is what it's called. The conformational change gives rise to an electrical signal. So this mechanical change becomes, it's an electromechanical, it's a mechanical to electrical energy conversion that goes first to the olfactory bulb and then to the areas of the brain that convert the electrical signal into a smell, or, if you will, into a signal that the brain processes and identifies as a scent, and therefore gives us that sense. And it is some advanced research has, which I may cover somewhere down the line, has brought us to the point where we can literally cross some of these senses, where we can smell the colors and taste the smells and variety of other things. But one of the things that our brain does when it is experiencing the physical arena is it culminates all of these different senses. So now we're on our third sense. Think about taking a sip of hot tea. Earl Grey is a very common, popular hot tea, and one of the greatest attributes of Earl Grey tea that I find over other teas is its smell. It just has a real and the perfect name for it is Earl Grey, because it does. It feels like gray velvet. It tastes and smells to me like gray velvet, and it's very calming and peaceful, and it works wonderful with a little bit of sugar and even a little bit of lemon. It seems to have a very relaxing kind of interface to it, and it's because the name, then looking at the tea, the smell of the tea, and the taste of the tea, all working together, gives you a very wonderful response to that particular tea, as teas go. And if you don't like tea, I apologize. So let's move on and look at how the smell actually works. And as we do, consider in the back of your mind just how these signals processed in your mind and in your spirit and as a part of a whole would really give a unique twist. And if you were to take the smell out of the experience of sight and hearing and your other senses, how much you'd be robbing and depriving yourself of this wonderful experience. That also will start to ground you in the power of the smell, so that later when we decide to remove it on purpose or to influence it in any way, you'll have a good idea of how significant that impact is going to be.
The nasal cavities consist of two extensive chambers, plus their associated nasal sinuses. The two main chambers are separated by a midline wall, the nasal septum. In humans, the nose has three functions. It forms a resonating cavity for the voice, it houses the olfactory organ that enables us to sense odors, and importantly, it is the upper part of the respiratory tract. As such, it functions to filter, warm, and moisten inhaled air before it reaches the lungs. The anterior nares, or nostril, is guarded by a collection of long, bristle-like hairs that prevent large, airborne objects like insects from entering the nose. Smaller particles, like pollen and dust, flow past the hairs and are trapped in a layer of sticky mucus that covers the internal lining of the nose. The nasal cavity is lined by a mucous membrane. Mucous membrane is a delicate layer of cells that is constantly moistened by secreted watery serous fluid. This moisture is transferred to the air as it passes through the nasal cavity. The nasal septum is relatively featureless. Deep to its mucous membrane is an extensive network of blood vessels. These blood vessels bring warm blood to the surface to enable the mucosa to warm inhaled air as it passes by. In addition, it keeps the mucosa well supplied with nutrients. No less than 5 arteries anastomose with each other within the septum. They are branches from the posterior and anterior ethmoidal arteries, the superior labial artery, the greater palatine artery, and the sphenopalatine artery. The confluence of these vessels near the anterior part of the septum creates an area of dense vascularity called Hasselbalch's area that is prone to drying and trauma, leading to nosebleeds. Sensory innervation of the nasal septum is supplied by the first and second branches of the trigeminal nerve. The anterior ethmoidal nerve supplies the antero-superior half of the septum, while the nasopalatine nerve supplies the postero-inferior half. A small area around the external nares is supplied by internal nasal branches from the infraorbital nerve. The nasopalatine nerve passes through the incisive foramen to supply the anterior aspect of the palate. The skeleton of the nasal septum is partly bone and cartilage. The bony part of the septum is formed by the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone, the vomer, and small vertical ridges from the superior surfaces of the palatine bone and the maxilla. Anteriorly, the septum is formed by mainly the septal cartilage, aided by 2 smaller cartilages, the vomerine and alar cartilages. The advantage of having cartilage in the part of the nose that protrudes in front of the face is that cartilage is flexible, so when the nose is moved around, for example during sporting events, it bends rather than breaks. The lateral wall of the nasal cavity has a much more complex structure than the septum. 3 prominent elevations, the superior, middle, and inferior conchae, narrow the nasal passages and create a large surface area, forcing inhaled air to swirl around and over them. This arrangement further helps in the warming and moistening of inhaled air. The conchae are projections of bone from the lateral wall of the nasal cavity covered by mucous membrane. The spaces around the conchae are called the meatises. The inferior meatus lies below and lateral to the inferior concha. The middle meatus lies below and lateral to the middle concha, and the superior meatus lies below and lateral to the superior concha. The space above the superior concha is the sphenoethmoidal recess. The sensory receptors for smell are located in the olfactory epithelium at the superior aspect of the nasal cavity. Odors in inhaled air are bound by the receptor cells, which, in turn, signal the olfactory bulb and olfactory regions of the brain. The 4 nasal sinuses, the frontal, ethmoidal, sphenoidal, and maxillary sinuses, are continuous with the nasal cavity. The openings, or ostia, through which the sinuses communicate with the nasal cavity are obscured by the overlying conchae, but are visible following removal of the conchae. The frontal sinus drains through a funnel-like tunnel, or infundibulum, into the upper end of the hiatus semilunaris, a shallow depression in the lateral wall of the middle meatus. The ethmoidal air cells drain into the nasal cavity in at least 3 locations. The anterior cells drain anterior to the hiatus semilunaris. The middle air cells drain into 1 or more openings in a bubble-like structure, the ethmoidal bulla, and the posterior air cells drain via 1 or more openings into the superior meatus. The sphenoidal air sinus drains through 1 or 2 openings into the sphenoethmoidal sinus. The maxillary sinus drains into the middle meatus through an opening in the inferior part of the hiatus semilunaris. The maxillary sinus was poorly designed for animals that walk upright. The drainage opening is usually near the top of the sinus, so the sinus has to fill completely before it can begin to drain. A 5th opening into the inferior meatus is the drainage site for the nasolacrimal duct. This duct carries overflow tears from the eye into the nasal cavity, which is why our nose runs when we laugh hard or cry. Sensory innervation of the lateral wall of the nasal cavity is supplied by lateral nasal branches from the anterior ethmoidal nerve and from the maxillary nerve. The nasal branches of the maxillary nerve enter the nasal cavity through the sphenopalatine foramen deep to the mucosa. The greater and lesser palatine nerves pass vertically to the greater and lesser palatine foramina to innervate the hard and soft palates respectively. A small area around the external nares is supplied by internal nasal branches from the infraorbital nerve. Several bones contribute to the lateral wall of the nasal cavity. The ethmoid forms most of the superior part of the lateral wall, including the upper and middle conchae. The lower half of the lateral wall is formed by the vertical process of the palatine bone and the body of the maxilla. The inferior concha is a separate bone. Anteriorly, the lateral wall is formed by the nasal bone and the lateral nasal and alar cartilages, plus a variable number of small, unnamed cartilages. In summary, a major function of the nasal cavities is to filter, warm, and moisten inhaled air before it reaches the lungs. The anatomical features that support this function are a large surface area, created by the nasal septum, the conchae, and sinuses, and narrow passageways so that most of the inhaled air is in close contact with the well-vascularized, warm, moist mucosa.
Now, no doubt that was a very comprehensive explanation and description, and and it was kind of high level. This second video, not I don't believe nearly as long, is much more along the processing of the senses, of the sense of smell. But that first video I like because it just gives you an awareness of how impacting your nasal cavity is on your entire respiratory system, as well as the sense of smell and other aspects of that sense. Anyhow, here is this video with regards to just the actual processing of the sense of smell.
The detection of specific airborne molecules, referred to as autogens, results in the sense of smell. As the autogen is inhaled, it moves through the nostril and into the nasal cavity. There it comes in contact with the olfactory epithelium. The olfactory bulb, which lies above the nasal cavity, receives sensory information from the olfactory epithelium. Within the upper nasal cavity, the autogens dissolve in the mucus lining, where they can interact with receptors on cells in a specialized region on the olfactory epithelium.
And of course, those signals then sent to the brain gives you the full processing of the sense of smell. So, those three senses working in concert with taste is kind of what I was referring to earlier with the Earl Grey tea. And taste is, I find, a very subjective type of sense. And it's interesting, I want you to just take a notice of this concept. Taste, more so than sight and hearing and other things, as a pure sense, is more subjective in that, you know, I love sardines in mustard or in oil and a little bit of salt on them, and I just think they're wonderful, which may cause someone else to groan and find that completely disgusting. Somebody else probably favors pie. I personally hardly like pie. I'll eat it, but there is something about pie that really turns me off, and I could probably go into a million reasons why that may be true. But nonetheless, you and I could not sit here and argue whether pie is good or bad, tasty or not tasty, based on our own opinions and our own awareness of how it tastes, simply because of the subjective nature. And because taste is subjective, again, it has a very big impact on idea generation because of what taste can do in building up rods of knowledge around taste and how it can affect the onslaught of a big idea. And here we see the tongue is covered with small bumps called taste buds that are grouped together in areas with different functions. The taste buds react to simple taste and pass messages to the brain. Just a quick funny story. I had told my wife when we first were married that I have a migrating tongue. I think that's what it's called. And she said, "What is that?" I said, "Well, my taste buds don't stay in the same place all the time." And she thought that was kind of ridiculous and really didn't believe me. And when our son was born, she one day saw one of the more demonstrative representations of these migrating taste buds, and she kind of got concerned and called me and said, "What's wrong with him? What has happened to his tongue?" And I laughed because all his taste buds had gone north and kind of clustered in one corner of his tongue, and the rest of the tongue was virtually flat. And I said, "Well, your son has the same thing I do, which is a migrating tongue, migrating taste buds." And it was kind of one of those moments where it was like, "Haha, I told you so." But she had seen it on him, and that's just a unique characteristic that he and I have. It does not seem to affect my taste, although I personally have never done any research to find out if there is any effect on that. But nonetheless, you have taste buds on your tongue that are the initial interaction with any type of food or anything that you're specifically tasting. Thus, there are distinct regions on the tongue where main tastes are recognized. And again, like I say, those taste buds moving around, I don't know if that affects the way I taste things. Probably would be a good study and a little research project that could yield some good results if I were to go. Especially since, like, taste buds on the tip of the tongue detect sweet taste, and those at the back of the tongue detect the bitter taste. So I guess there could be some argument that when the taste buds on a migrating tongue collect at the back of the tongue, maybe things are more bitter across the spectrum of taste. I don't know. And the more I talk about it here, the more I want to go and do some research and come back and report on it, and so do in one of our podcasts. But groups of taste buds at the side of the tongue measure sour and salty taste. So you got bitter in the back, sweet in the front, sour and salty on the sides. And the taste of any food is a combination of these four basic tastes. These taste buds, or flavor receptors, transmit the different taste information as a message to the brain. It is the brain which processes the information and tells us what food is actually in our mouths. And it does that as a result of a database, if you will, of information that it accumulates over time. You put a piece of, a good example is when my children were very young, they liked salmon. And then when they got a little bit older and understood what salmon was and could better relate it to the large database of food in their mouths, they, for a period of time, did not like salmon so much. Actually, they have moved back to it. My daughter, she loves raw salmon. She likes sushi. We don't let her eat a lot of it just for the fear of her age versus eating raw food, but she really likes raw salmon. I almost guarantee you in 3 or 4 years, she won't touch raw salmon for probably the better part of her childhood until she gets to be maybe a teenager. Simply because, I'm not saying for sure, there's no guarantee, but she would compare that to the other database of foods in her mind and probably find raw salmon, especially if she goes a period of time without it, to be distasteful, maybe too salty. Probably the what do you say, the way it tastes in the mouth, the way it feels in your mouth, and the word's escaping me, but that texture would probably become a turnoff as she continues to increase her database of food and relating it to it. Now, one thing I make sure of is that doesn't happen. I like to eat raw salmon and sushi, and so I make sure that it is before the kids on a pretty regular basis. As well, I do steak, and those are two things that my kids really like. It tends to impact the pocketbook when it comes time for barbecue, we can't just throw hot dogs on the barbecue. We have to get ribeyes, and we have to cook up a nice piece of salmon. But that being said, if I were to allow her to go a period of time without it, I may lose my little partner in at the sushi restaurant for eating sushi. So I pretty much on a regular basis like to take her. And simply by understanding how taste works and taste buds work, that has helped me recognize that if I want to cultivate a fine food, a respect for fine food and kind of a connoisseur of good food in my children, then one of the things I have to do is make sure that I maintain a database of information in their heads of different foods and don't let them go too long in between, and for the fear of them building up too many ideas of what food might taste like or not taste like. And I have lost on a few accounts, and we all fight the whole get your kids to eat their vegetables. But if you can start them very young when they don't have a lot of information to compare it to, and then just continue to feed them those vegetables in different formats and constantly build up their database of knowledge about the vegetables, not just how good they are for them, but the flavors and the different ways they can be eaten, and even giving them a history of the vegetables. More information a person has, the more likely they are to enjoy it, and then also make those vegetables fun. And both of my kids also love okra, and they like pickled okra, and that's because we go into the grocery store, grab a jar of pickled okra off the shelf, and eat the entire jar before we have finished grocery shopping. And this accomplishes two things. One, it keeps my kids occupied and out of the cereal aisle while I'm grocery shopping, and two, it's just fun. But it gives them a taste for a green vegetable that they enjoy, and that helps us leverage the green beans and the broccoli and the other vegetables that they may not like as well. But all of that being said, these taste buds and these flavor buds are in our mouths, and they're bringing in this very subjective thing that we call taste through these flavor receptors. And we each have about 10,000 taste buds on our tongue. Now, honestly, when I look at my migrating tongue, I can't see 10,000 taste buds. When I see them all clustered up, there might be 60 or 70 if I were to stop and really count them that I can visibly see. So obviously, the taste buds range in size, and I don't know when they say 10,000 taste buds what the smallest size is. I would venture to say it's at least visible to the naked eye. But as we grow older, our taste buds then become less sensitive, which is one of the reasons elderly people may not enjoy food quite as much. I'll tell you that as you don't even have to grow old for this to happen. If you are salting your food, drinking lots of soda or other produced or eating other produced type of foods as opposed to natural foods, which we all do because we don't have much choice. That's what gets put on the grocery shelves. But if you are excessively using hot sauce and things like this, you will start to dull in your taste. And may I suggest, and we'll do an entire section at some point on fasting, but may I suggest the art of fasting and for you to look into it. I will do a module on fasting because I've done several extensive reports on it. But one of the things that fasting does, besides all the other benefits that it has, is it restores your sense of taste. And whether it gives your taste buds a rest, which I don't think is the main thing, I think what it does, fasting gives you a chance to clean out the database, clean out the memory of what things taste like. It also changes, fasting changes your body at a cellular level, and it will give you a renewed perspective on food and what it tastes like. A watermelon, I eat my watermelon with salt and pepper, thanks to my dad, and I find that to be just the best way to eat watermelon. But after fasting for a few days, if I eat a piece of watermelon, the flavors are so robust and they just explode in my mind, and the color of the watermelon becomes redder than red, and it's just an amazing. And I would not even for a second think to destroy that amazing taste sensation with salt and pepper, as I would if you gave me a piece of watermelon right now at this moment. So we'll get back to that, because we're going to talk about how fasting can help you with developing ideas, and we'll get back to how fasting will allow you to clean your palate and keep you very sharp to what things really taste like. And we'll do an entire section also on spices and how to register the way things taste, and then relate those things to other things. You can actually map tastes to very specific objects, and you can create your own taste maps that later can be used like modules or like libraries in a computer program, where if you fast and then map tastes to objects, or taste to colors, or taste to even ideas or packets of ideas, you can later access those packets of ideas in great detail simply by reproducing the taste that's in your mouth. You can do this similarly with smells, except the problem with that is it's harder to create a specific smell on purpose. But with taste, you have such a plethora of spices that you can just very directly mix them together and create these mental patterns. So it's a very useful way to store lots of information without having to consciously maintain that information. Anyhow, we'll get to that down the road. But hot foods taste better because the heat causes more of the pleasant smells to rise into the nose. These abundant smells contribute to the total taste of food, and we kind of talked about that earlier. So the sense of taste, it's amazing. I would not want to lose my sense of taste, because as I grow older and get better at cooking and become more patient with cooking and understand how different things relate to one another, and how different spices will change as they're heated and whatnot. This week I made my first bowl of ceviche, which is taking fresh seafood, and instead of breaking down the proteins with heat or cooking it, you break down the proteins with lime and lemon juice, and a little bit of white vinegar, salt and sugar, and some spices. And oh boy, it was for the first one, I was impressed. Not impressed. I was happy that it didn't come out tasting fishy, but rather all those tastes, all those flavors really bound together. And I put it on a bed of spinach leaves, and it was really a wonderful thing. But I did it primarily because I'd never made ceviche, and now that I have, my mind races to think of all the different ways I could alter the basic ceviche formula, and what wonderful taste I'm going to be able to discover in the future using that whole process and that whole method. Anyhow, not to get off on that, let's take a look at these videos and get an idea of how we taste.
This is the Professor Show. You want to learn. You don't have time. Here is a solution.
How do we taste? Say you take a bite of a delicious apple. You've got apple and saliva in your mouth. The saliva is more delicious than you think because it breaks down apple into chemicals, some of which interact with extensions of the nervous system in your mouth. This is called chemoreception. It differs from other types of sensation, like light bouncing off of the eyes, because the chemicals bond with the part of you and then need to be metabolized. It's like a bee flying into the bud of a flower. The chemicals enter what we call taste buds, 8 to 10,000 of them around the mouth, predominantly on the tongue. You can see them with the naked eye as little bumps. In Latin, they're called papillae, which in English means bud. Inside of each bud, you've got 50 to 100 taste cells. They respond to 1 of 5 different types of chemicals. Salty, sodium, important for water regulation as well as nervous function. Sour responds to acids, indicating food may have gone bad, perhaps the presence of bacteria. Bitter responds to nitrogen-based poisons like caffeine. It's a naturally occurring pesticide, neurotoxin for the bugs, neuroheaven for us. But not all poisons are fun, and dose matters a lot for safety. Then you've got sweet, indicating the presence of carbohydrates, and something called umami, recently discovered by the Japanese, and so they got to name it, planted their flag on your tongue. Umami means savory or meaty. And the primary chemical there is L-glutamate, which is the major excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain. Literally food for thought. So carbohydrates, protein, and fat are necessary for proper functioning, savory and sweet. Thank you, Darwin. So when one of these chemicals connects with a taste cell, it's like that moment in Princess Bride where Inigo finally leans on the knot in the tree and it opens a pathway down into the pit of despair. In this case, the pathway that's triggered is a cascade of nervous activity down one of three facial nerves to the brainstem up into the brain, where the signals meet with incoming signals from smell in areas of the brain important for emotion, such as the anterior insula and the amygdala. Smell can then provide subtlety to the flavor, so we can taste more than 5 things. If you're into longer names, smell is also known as olfaction and taste is gustation. In summary, taste is when saliva breaks down food so that chemicals can get into the taste buds, bond with taste cells, and send signals to the brain about what we're eating. So how do we taste? I guess you'd have to ask a cannibal. My mom says that her grandson is scrumptious, so maybe scrumptious?
All right, forgive me. But I just thought that was a nifty overview and a little something fresh to throw into the mix here. But notice how he again related the fact that our senses all mingle together to kind of provide us with an additional sense. And he also touched on the fact that our taste can affect our emotions, and that's something that we'll discuss in the future. Anyhow, here's a much more clear definition of how our taste buds work.
The sense of taste has been a great mystery to many scientists. It was the miracle of the microscope that finally allowed scientists to examine the tongue in more extensive detail. Upon examination, the tongue was found to have many sensory regions, known as papillae, scattered on the surface. The 3 papillae are valate, foliate, and fungiform. Each of these has a taste bud on its surface that is sensitive to one of the 4 basic tastes: sweet, sour, salt, and bitter. The valate papillae are grouped together and formed a V shape on the back portion of the tongue. They are responsive to the bitter and sour tastes that are present in various foods. The foliate papillae are located on either side of the tongue, just above the valate papillae. They are also sensitive to sour traits of food. The fungiform papillae are the most abundant. They cover the tip and outer edges of the tongue. These papillae are responsive to the sweet and salty tastes that are distinctive in many foods. The papillae we've just discussed contain what are known as the primary taste buds. It is important to note that there are many taste buds scattered throughout the mouth and throat, but these buds assist the primary taste buds in determining each particular taste. In order to understand how the sense of taste is achieved, we must examine the taste bud itself. A taste bud is made up of various cells. The cells of each taste bud are regenerated by one of the 3 cranial nerves every 10 to 14 days. Some of these cells function as receptors, which are responsible for sending chemical information regarding substances in the mouth to the brain. Each receptor cell has a unique shape. Specific chemicals from foods must match the shape of each receptor cell in order to trigger a signal to the brain. This is known as the lock and key principle. The signal from a receptor cell will travel from the nerve ends up into one of the 3 cranial nerves. It will then pass on into the central nervous system, where regions of the brain stem will decode the chemical information into a distinctive taste. It is also important to note that the sense of sight and smell work collectively to heighten the marvelous experience we know as taste.
And once again, she reiterates that culmination of the different senses. So that's taste, and we won't belabor the point. Let's move on into touch. While your other 4 senses, sight, hearing, smell, and taste, are located in specific parts of the body, your sense of touch is found all over. And this is a very key point when it comes to touch, because you're going to discover that as you are working on generating ideas, that this sense of touch can either inhibit or help your process. And when you're in meditation and prayer and silent pondering and thought, the sense of touch can very much come into play, and its role is typically unknown, unexpected. The best word is unmonitored. And we don't sit there and, we don't even think about what we're touching, and that the signals from that touch are entering our body and are either helping or hurting the very process of generating a big idea. You know, if you're, I always refer to the engineer, and that could be mechanical or otherwise, but you have a pencil in your hand while you're thinking. You are generating subliminal signals in your mind that are earthy, and because the pencil's wood, and that are weighty because of the weight of the pencil itself, that are dark because of the color of the lead. The yellow itself of the color of the pencil can actually be affecting you through your sight, of course. But we're talking touch. Having that pencil in your hand, or if that is a mechanical pencil, it could be changing the way you think. I know that when I use a mechanical pencil with a very large piece of lead in it, a very large, what are those called, 0.08 millimeter type of lead, that I tend to think in much broader spectrums, and I tend to think with heavier, more concrete ideas. And as soon as you put I believe it's a 0.02 millimeter, a very fine lead in my hand, my way of thinking changes. It becomes more focused, more finite, but it also becomes more brittle, simply because the lead itself forces me as I write to take care of how I'm pressing. It also forces me to time slice part of my focus over to my hand to ensure that I don't break the lead as I write. And when I get excited about the idea and I change my focus into the idea itself, I will break very fine lead on a regular basis. So if I'm brainstorming, no doubt I am using and preferring to use a much thicker pencil. So that's just some of the, that's just the tip of the iceberg on how touch affects our thinking. But if you consider this and you recognize this reality as you are building rods of knowledge, which we're going to get into in the iGestalt Creative Thinking Strategy itself, you being able to stimulate your mind and build rods of knowledge around touch can be incredibly beneficial to your thought process. This because your sense of touch originates in the bottom layer of your skin called the dermis. The fact that it's found all over your body is why this is. The dermis is filled with many tiny nerve endings which give you information about the things with which your body comes in contact. They do this by carrying the information to the spinal cord, which then sends messages to the brain where the feeling is registered. And again, it's registered, it's recorded, and it is a database is continuing to be built of different senses. I always I've seen, you know, I don't want my kids to burn themselves, and I will tell them don't touch the stove. And I remember when my son was very small, his grandmother was, don't touch the stove, you're going to burn yourself. And my comment, which at the time seemed unconcerning or filled with a lack of empathy, was that, oh, but he'll only do it once. And what I was inferring was the fact that if he touches a hot stove, it will give a database entry that you don't ever want to touch that hot stove again. The hot stove was not in such a way that it was causing danger, presenting a danger to him. And in fact, I would much rather him touch a stove that was hot and get a little bit of a sensation of the heat than to touch a stove many times and develop a habit to touching the stove when it's not hot. And then one day when the stove is incredibly hot, have him touch it and actually hurt himself or scar himself. So, but that being said, when we touch something, it doesn't matter what it is. The first time you touch anything, you are going to generate a database entry in your mind that's going to give you relational information at a time you need it. Have you ever touched a starfish? I'm probably talking to somebody out there that's never laid hands on a starfish. And it's a starfish is a very interesting creature. Whether it's alive or whether it's dead, it has a little bit of a different tactile feel. Also, the underbelly, close to the mouth, the center of the starfish, where they're like little fibrous, I don't know what the fibrous material around that mouth, probably to help filter in and out the sand and the things that it's bringing in to eat, has a different feel than to just on the other side of it, where it's more rocky and rough and in contact with the rest of the ocean. It's two different feelings. But if you've never felt that, that is a feeling that you cannot relate to. And you say, well, what would that matter? Well, it wouldn't, except that maybe if you are deciding that you want to, let's say you're an engineer and you are somebody that is designing enclosures, having a very large database of items that you touched can give you, when it comes time to developing it, can give you a unique perspective on how you want something to feel. If I say the word carbon fiber, you may have a certain sense in your mind of what carbon fiber tactily feels like. And if I say polished rock, or if I say glass, or if I say a snail, obviously all of these type of things you have touched before, but to stop and take the time to touch them and to go through an interrogation process of the item will create kind of subfields in the database of your understanding of how certain things feel in your hands, and they will give you much more complete models for the rods of knowledge of those touch senses, that later when you are using those rods for idea generation are going to access parts of the sixth sense that you otherwise before would not have access to. So whereas I said we could create a taste map, you can also create a touch map. However, I don't put it in the same category as a taste map. A taste map you can literally map, like mapping fields or mapping ideas or whatever. You can relate a scent or a group of scents, a taste sense, a group of tastes. I was saying the word sense in the S-E, but that didn't quite sound right. It sounded like scent, as if you're using your nose. So you can map the taste to the idea or to the body of information. But when it comes to touch, you're not really creating a map so much as you are spending more time understanding the touch, and you are building up a greater awareness of your touch and what it feels like. And this can be used in a meditational process, but it can also be used to make your touch that much more sensitive, so that when you are spending time building rods of knowledge to come to a gestalt that brings you to a creative idea, the things that you'll be touching will be generating larger bodies of information and contributing more significantly to your overall idea. Not to belabor that point any further, let's move into some videos that show you how your skin and how the sense of touch gets transmuted or picked up out of the physical arena and brought into your brought in through the sensual arena and ultimately to the conscious and subconscious arenas.
The sensory cortex, as represented in red, behind the central groove of the brain, is the primary area for the interpretation of incoming sensory information. The association area coordinates this information. The sense of touch involves the stimulation of receptors in the skin. The most superficial receptors are found in the epidermis. They are the free nerve endings, which respond to touch and pain, Merkel's discs, which respond to continuous touch, and the end bulbs of Krauss, the receptors that probably register cold. Below the epidermis is the dermis. In the dermis are Meissner's corpuscles, which send information to the brain about the texture of the object that is being touched. Nerve endings around the bases of the hair follicles, which are stimulated by movement of the hair. Pacinian corpuscles, which respond to pressure, and Ruffini corpuscles, which respond to changes in temperature.
As with all the senses, there is a very analog type of data reception or data collection that is taking place. And what I mean by that is it's fluid and it's being impacted from multiple angles. Here you have pressure and temperature and sharpness, bluntness, heat. Well, we mentioned temperature. Other aspects of touch that, when all brought together, is a very, like I say, an analog. It's not exact, and it's fluid, and it can be changed, and it can be manipulated. And when you learn how the rods of knowledge can be utilized, this sense of touch during a brainstorming session can actually be used to help push an idea through your conscience and through your subconscious and bring it to the forefront much faster, or with a greater impact in a certain aspect of the idea. So it's just nifty, and this sense of touch is a very, as you can see, multiple receptors bringing in the different signals.
The body's largest organ, the skin, serves as a protective coat, guarding internal structures from the outside environment. It is composed of two distinct layers of tissue, the epidermis and the dermis. The epidermis consists of an outer sheet of dead cells called the stratum corneum, and a deeper section of rapidly dividing cells called the basal layer. When dead cells of the stratum corneum are damaged or scraped off during body activity, cells from the basal layer rise to replace them. The epidermis serves as the body's initial barrier to invading foreign substances. Directly below the basal layer is the thicker dermis layer, made of dense connective tissue. Embedded within the dermis are several kinds of important sensory receptors, including thermoreceptors, which detect temperature change, Meissner's corpuscles, which are sensitive to touch, and free nerve endings, which detect pain and tissue damage. The dermis also contains many other structures, including sweat glands, hair follicles, and blood vessels.
It's a very complex organ, and to be so huge and cover the entire body and to play the role of protection and everything else. The sense of touch, though, is directly related to anything externally exposed. But let me even add to that, the sense of touch can be felt internally as well. If you break a rib, I guarantee you the sense of that rib hitting against that broken rib, scraping against other organs or other aspects of your internal organs, internal body, that is a sense of touch. And of course that is transmitted by the nerve endings that are found inside your body. But that sense of touch can be an internal thing as well as an external thing, and therefore that is something to consider when we are anticipating how we are going to utilize the sense of touch in idea generation. So we are going to stop here and this video, and then I would ask you to check out the third video, which will take us through the rest of the framework of the Sensual Arena, and of course we'll jump into the limitations and boundaries of these wonderful senses that we have at the beginning of that next video. So we'll wrap up here, and I'll see you on the other side.